Welcome to Conversations Different, the podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican, focusing on the interesting people, places, and issues of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez, and today I'm talking to Heather Cox Richardson, professor, historian, author, and soon a featured speaker at the Santa Fe International Literary Festival. Welcome, and thanks for taking time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
It's exciting that you're in Maine and I'm in Santa Fe, and we're both freezing because it's raining so much. So the spring weather is fascinating across the country. You have been a center of discussion almost since the beginning of the Trump era. And I want to go back to that and talk about why you began chronicling what was happening, why a newsletter, and why did you call it Letters from an American?
So putting me back to the beginning of the Trump administration, the first one is interesting, and nobody's made that connection before. In fact, right after Trump was elected, Charlie Kirk of Turning Points USA, although it wasn't Turning Points USA at the time, began to talk about professors who were dangerous to American society. And I was on that first iteration of the professor watch list. And it was interesting because it was a very rudimentary website. And he had clearly just reached for the names he could find. And I knew that I had been on a list long ago because somebody objected to an article I wrote for a children's magazine about Abraham Lincoln. And so he just grabbed my name from that. I've never had a complaint in any way about my teaching, and was not terribly visible at the time. But I wrote a response to all the people who wrote to me and said, "Oh, we're terrified for you," and so on and so forth. And I wrote back to them about how this was a moment for those of us who cared about democracy to stand up. And I posted it on my Facebook page, and it went viral, and it got picked up in all kinds of places. You might not have realized that was me. I came off the professor watch list the next day, but that was not, again, I didn't start the letters then. Then after the travel ban of the once Trump took office,
right, for the Muslims and others,
wrote about how this was an attempt to create a shock event that would destabilize the country and make it easier for a strong man to rise. But it was also a time when people could take that instability and create a stronger nation. That too went viral. But I was a professor, I was writing books, I was moving house, I was doing all kinds of things. The reason that I started the letters was because I had been writing about once a week on Facebook, just an essay or something. And I hadn't done it in the summer of 2019 because I was writing a new book and because I was moving and so on. And I hadn't written since July. And on September 15th, when I was supposed to be traveling back to Boston, I got stung by a yellow jacket, and I'm allergic, and
Ouch.
I did not have my EpiPen. So I didn't feel like I'd be safe to get on the road. I live sort of in the middle of nowhere. I didn't feel like I'd be safe in the middle to get back on the road unless I knew that I was not going to have an anaphylactic reaction, which I did not. But I thought, well, as long as I'm sitting here swelling, I might as well write an essay for Facebook the way I've been doing, but haven't done since July. So I sat down and I sort of wrote about what the country looked like to me in that moment. And it was 2 days after then chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, had written a letter to the acting director of national intelligence saying, "We know there's been a whistleblower about something, and by law you are supposed to give it to us, and you haven't. So cough that sucker up." I'm paraphrasing. I put that in the letter, and there were so many questions. I did decide to drive back to Boston, and when I got there about 3.5 hours later, I had thousands and thousands of questions. So I didn't write that night because I thought nobody wants to hear from me twice in a row. I wrote the night after that. That was September 17th, 2019, and I've written every night since.
So the response was amazing, and people keep asking, how did we get here? And that's one of the reasons you wrote your book, is to try to answer that question and show that a lot of the present is rooted in our past. What I still can't get over is how we got here again. And that's just been the hardest thing, I think, to understand and to accept about our national psyche, because it's the voters who did this.
It is. But one of the things that I think Americans make the mistake of doing repeatedly is thinking that once they have constructed a democracy that reflects the actual will of the people, you can sit back and relax because it's not going anywhere. And yes, Democracy Awakening was designed to say, how did we get here? Where are we? And how do we get out? But what I think we're seeing in this moment today is a lot of people who thought that our modern American state was here to stay, maybe get tinkered with by one party or by the other, but it was here to stay. today are recognizing that that was never the case, and they are now stepping up to the plate. And we saw this in the 1850s. We saw this in the 1890s. We saw this in the 1930s. Now we're seeing it again. One of the things that we will have to do when we get out of this moment is to put real guardrails around our democracy so that we cannot be taken over yet again by a small cabal of radical reactionaries who are trying to destroy democracy.
So that sounds somewhat hopeful in that you believe we can get out of this moment.
Sure. Of course I do. We've gotten out of moments like this before, and I don't buy that flippant, of course we can. I don't mean to suggest it's not going to be extraordinarily difficult, and everybody's got to be part of it. But we are not at the end of this story by any stretch of the imagination. One of the quotations I love is that in the end, the good guys always win. So if the good guys aren't winning, it's not the end.
Oh, that's a great one. I listen to the Bulwark a lot, and JVL is like my hero, and bad JVL is the worst because he's so pessimistic, and I tend to be that way, hoping for better. And I like the idea that the end isn't here yet, because it seems like this first 3 months has been very fast moving toward authoritarian, less democracy, and more central power than as an American I'm comfortable with.
Well, that's certainly the way it was intended to be presented, and that is the way that members of the administration are talking. And yet, in fact, there has been extraordinary pushback, not only among the courts and certainly in members of the legal profession, but now also education. And I would add alternative media, not the mainstream media, but all the new outlets. But primarily, I think you are seeing it among the American people. And I don't just mean that they're out in the streets, although they are as well in huge numbers, and that will get bigger across this summer, but also by challenging right-wing candidates at the school boards and at town meetings, and obviously at the representatives when they hold town halls, but also at the state level where people are running for office and insisting that we get rid of things like gerrymandering. Democracy is really a sport that you have to get involved in. And I think people are realizing that and getting involved in the ground level. And that's how you build a groundswell of change. And I see it all around.
That's really encouraging. And honestly, New Mexico just passed legislation that's going to allow open primaries for the first time. So that means I don't have to register as a Democrat or Republican to participate, which we did for years. So we're doing things. We don't have independent redistricting yet, but that's like kind of one of the next steps that people who are pro-democracy forces in the state are going after. So that's important.
Well, and that's not partisan.
Yeah.
The idea that our elections and our government should actually reflect who we are is not at all partisan. And that is actually extraordinarily popular and would do a lot to, I think, get rid of what people see as this terrible divide in the nation. Because while people seem to be bitterly divided over politics, in fact, if you look at how people feel, even about hot button issues, vast majorities of Americans agree on them. They might not agree on every last comma. There might be adjustments that people have to make. But, more than 80% of Americans agree that they would like common sense gun safety legislation. That's not a fringe opinion. And we could go right down the list. People like clean air, and they like clean water, and they like business regulation, and they like taxation for wealthiest Americans and for corporations. Those are all popular stands, but they're not reflected in our politics because of voter suppression and gerrymandering and this rhetoric that has forced the Republican Party ever further right.
That's a great point on which to take a break. We'll be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
Are you dreaming of a home of your own in Santa Fe but feel like it may never happen? Homewise is here to help. We are a local nonprofit that has helped close to 7,000 New Mexicans from all income levels and backgrounds become homeowners. Homewise has everything you need to succeed in home ownership, including free coaching and classes, real estate services, affordable fixed-rate mortgages with low down payments, and down payment assistance to qualified borrowers who meet income restrictions and credit qualifications. We'll be with you every step of the way. Get started today on your path to owning a home. Call 505-983-9473 or visit us at homewise.org. Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 188231.
We're back with Conversations Different with Heather Cox Richardson, discussing what Americans can do to preserve their democracy. I really love how you're talking about what starts at the grassroots, and I have a question for you that was given to me by my boss, actually, because she worries, what will these big protests do? Is that just a waste of time, or can that energy lead to action and to change?
Oh, no. Protests, visible protests, are very important, and they're very important for two reasons. The first is true anywhere, but the second is unique to America. The first is that it convinces other people that they are not alone. Like, lots of people sit around thinking they're the only ones who think this way. And one of the reasons we're in a different moment now than we have been in other times in the United States is that because of cell phones and the internet and modern technology, people are able to make connections that they would not have made before, to recognize that they are not alone and that they do have supporters. So that's very important right there, just to demonstrate that you're not alone in the ways you think about reclaiming American democracy. But in the United States, there's something very, very important about demonstrating and showing that there is not popular support behind a certain government. And that is that, quite literally, in the United States, the sovereignty of our government, the government of the United States, is not given by anybody but we the people. Quite literally, the Constitution of the United States begins, we the people create this government. And that government then is enumerated in the Constitution, and it has certain ways that it is supposed to behave. There's 3 branches of government. They all have different rights and privileges.
And they check each other. Yeah.
They check each other and all that. So if you are not operating according to that Constitution, you are operating without the power that was given to you by the American people in the Constitution. And that means that you are not operating legitimately. That's something that really matters when you think about the idea of being able to rule people who are, 334 million people in this country. So you see this with politicians, and certainly with this administration who's been saying, oh, we have a mandate. A mandate usually means that there is a large group of people behind you. In fact, of course, with them, more people voted for somebody other than Donald Trump than voted for him. And at this point, his popularity ranking is down around 40%. So the idea that he has the American people behind him is just wrong. And that makes it easier for other people to challenge him and say, well, him and other MAGAs to say, wait a minute, if he's that unpopular, I could pick up those voters and I could be more popular. I would have more legitimacy. So there is this popular idea that you're not alone. But in the United States, there is also the idea that if you do not have the people behind you, you are not a legitimate governmental official using that power.
Right. So the idea is, if he gets into, let's say, the 30s, which is almost unheard of for a president, at that point, people will view him as less legitimate, and other people might start fighting for his power or opposing him. And that would maybe make the government that we have right this minute more democratic, or at least more representative.
Yes, although a couple of caveats to that. First of all, it's a little hard to imagine him getting too much deeper into the 30s. I could be wrong. Who knows what the future is going to bring. Remember, in every reactionary right-wing movement, there is a ceiling of about 33%, but there is also a floor of about 25%.
Right.
Those people are never going to leave him. And this idea that somehow 100% of people are going to come out and say this is crazy is just wrong. It just doesn't happen. So partly the idea is that he will become less popular. But also, I think what you are seeing among the Republicans, but even more so in this moment among the Democrats, is people testing out what actions and what messages are most appealing to a majority of voters. And you see this sometimes, people talking about the Democrats being at odds. I don't think they're at odds. I think what you're seeing is something very like what we saw in the 1890s or the 1850s, when there's a groundswell of opposition to a rising authoritarian government, and those who don't agree with it on all kinds of different places in the political spectrum start to test out what is it that people really want. And one person says, well, this is what people care about. And somebody else says, well, this is what people care about. But ultimately, what we will see, I suspect, is some political figures, and we may not even know who they are yet, but beginning to articulate an inclusive new vision for the country. And that, if history tells us anything, will end up bringing together a lot of people from across the political spectrum to address, the needs of the 21st century.
Right. And that's actually one of the fun parts of politics and policy is watching those discussions form and seeing who, is it Gavin Newsom bringing every Republican on his podcast, or Gretchen Whitmer hiding in the White House behind her folder, or, J.B. Pritzker's out and AOC's traveling with Bernie. We don't know. And it, like you said, there's people out there that we don't know who might capture the moment. And
think of Abraham. Yeah. Think of Abraham Lincoln. In 1855, if you had said he was going to be a president in 2 cycles, people would have been like, who? He had one undistinguished term in the House of Representatives, and he was a corporate lawyer on the Western frontier. But he listened and he put together the language and the ideology, the platform that a fledgling Republican Party could stand on.
Right. I always wonder what he would think of if he saw his party today, because one of the things Republicans like to do is say, well, we're the party that freed the slaves. It was the Democrats that kept them. And they don't admit that they basically changed positions.
Yeah, and they did, of course, in the 1960s. Yeah. And that's, one of the ways to think about American history and American political parties is that the names of the parties and what they stand for sometimes does a whole 360. Yes. But there are these 2 strands in American life, one of which is the idea that everybody should be treated equally before the law, have a right to a say in their government, and have equal access to resources. And the other one that says some people are better than others and have the right to rule. And those 2 strands have run through our history since the beginning.
And I think that's something that you really bring out so well in your books and in your newsletter, is that this moment is so rooted in our past. I mean, the Know Nothing Party, to me, is the direct ancestor of the people, the MAGA people at this point. They have so many of the same beliefs.
Yes, and the Know Nothings were officially known as the American Party, and they were active in the 1850s.
Right.
And yes, in fact, they were anti-immigrant, and the Republican Party rose to stand. They took some of the Know Nothings with them, but they rose to stand against it because the Know Nothings were not were most famous for what they did in Massachusetts in their attempt to stop Irish immigrants from being able to become citizens of the United States.
We always have someone that we dislike, don't we, as a country, whether it's the Irish, the Italians, or the Germans at different points in our history. And now it's just everybody that's immigrating who I guess isn't from South Africa.
Yes, but the other thing that is interesting about this moment is that Americans have talked a lot throughout our history about class and wealth. And we really stopped doing that really in the 1960s. And you are starting to see that again, where people are saying, wait a minute, we're all one and the same, those of us who are part of the 99% who don't have a lot. It's that 1% who are the people that are not like us. And that's a really interesting shift. One of the most interesting things to me that signaled a sea change in our history was the reaction to the man who shot the healthcare executive in Manhattan.
Yeah, they weren't mad about it. We'll be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision-targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santaFeNewMexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We are back with Conversations Different and Heather Cox Richardson. What is the message that you plan to bring to Santa Fe?
I'm not sure I have a message specifically for Santa Fe. What I talk about and what seems to me to be the real momentum of this moment is that we are in a time when ordinary Americans are participating in democracy, and they are not only trying to take back their democracy from those who would destroy it, but they are beginning to articulate what a new kind of nation would look like. And I think that's extraordinarily important. If you think about American democracy democracy, it was never designed to handle the kinds of extraordinary questions that it would confront going forward. So in the 1850s, it had to deal with the idea of westward expansion. In the 1890s, it had to deal with industrialization. In the 1930s, it had to deal with globalization. Now, one of the things that the United States has to face is the internet and what that has done to bring the world closer, but also climate change. And we're going to have to figure out as a nation, but also as a world, how to address those things. And I suspect you don't have all the answers. I know I don't have all the answers, but I do have faith that if we all get involved and think about ways to approach the 21st century, we will figure it out.
That's a very optimistic perspective, and I think that's something people will enjoy hearing because they want to feel hopeful right at a time when they're listening to the president say he wants to restart Alcatraz and some of the stranger things that have come out of that administration for policy. Do you believe that there will be midterm elections?
Yes, okay. I do. Now, what we're really looking at, though, is will they be free and fair? Remember, even Putin has elections all the time. We just know who's going to win. And by the way, we've had something like that in the United States, in the American South from about 1874 to 1965. They held elections, just everybody knew who was going to win. So it is certainly possible that we will go that direction. This is one of the things that I'm concerned about and that I really urge people to fight for the end of voter suppression and for free and fair elections. And, whether or not that's going to go to a system that is freer and fairer or the other direction is very much up in the air right now. There are legal cases about it virtually every day. And if you care about those things, it's a good time to speak up.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. We were fortunate in New Mexico to have paper ballots, audit trails, very easy registration. You still have to prove you're a citizen when you go in, but pre-voting before the day of the election, just lots of access. The whole point has been to increase access so that anyone, if they work 24/7, practically, they can go vote. And it's kind of interesting to me how afraid some people are of all voters participating because they're trying to choose their voters.
That's exactly right. You're letting the politicians choose the voters rather than the other way around. And it's important to remember that that does not just discriminate against the people you don't like. That is, once you start to let politicians pick whomever they want, they could very easily exclude you. And what they do is they increasingly pick their voters and worry that they will be primaried from the right, which is how the Republican Party has gone so off the rails because they have very deliberately set up this system. It's not good for anybody because it does create, this real perversion of what an elected government is supposed to look like.
Yeah, because if the people aren't choosing the people who are going to govern them, then what legitimacy really do you have? That's kind of, and I don't know if any of it will change if you can't get money out of politics, but at least if you have broad participation from people, that can counter the weight of the money, I would hope.
Well, yes, and there's another theoretical and general objection to the idea of politicians picking their own voters in a democracy. And this is something that scholars look at a lot, and that is that in a democracy, you need to have at least two viable parties. And by viable, I mean that they have a realistic chance of being elected. And the reason for that is that if people stop feeling like they are going to have a say in their government, they stop supporting the government, they stop thinking it's legitimate. And we've already got a crisis in this country in that we have had a number of times lately presidents who did not win the popular vote actually ending up in the White House, which doesn't help the idea of the legitimacy of the president. But in a larger scale, if they don't believe in that government, there are only two possible futures. One is that a government is going to have to crack down on people with violence, with voter suppression, with intimidation, and so on to make sure that they will stay knuckled under to a government that is a minority government. And minority, I mean a political minority government. And you can see the attempt of the Trump administration to do this right now. But the other extreme is that the people say, okay, we're going to take that government over, and they turn to violence to do that. And neither of those two scenarios are ones that will promote stability, will promote the rule of law, will promote business, will promote all of the things that most of us think are good in a democratic society where we have the ability, as I say, to be treated equally before the law, to choose our government, and to have equal access to resources so that we feel like we have the opportunity to thrive. And so it's not just a question of, I want my guy to win. It's a question of, am I going to participate in a society that is stable enough to enable me and my children to create the kinds of lives we want?
Right. I mean, and that's really fascinating to me because the whole idea of the American dream is that anyone can succeed. We all have, our kids will have a better life than we had, and we are the shining city on the hill. And yet we elected a president who, regularly kind of denigrates the country, said they have to make it great again because it's not great, and now is instituting policies that make life very uncertain. I mean, the whole idea of the tariffs and what's going to happen to the price of lobsters, where you live, or the, green chili, can we import it or can we export it? I mean, everybody's kind of on tenterhooks right now.
Yes, the instability is something that can be used to serve a rising authoritarian because people get so upset about the tariffs or other instabilities that they turn to him to fix things. And you certainly see him trying to do this with the inside deals he has cut with some kinds of tariffs, but also with his increasing protestations these days that he's going to do it. He's the one who gets to fix everything, even though it doesn't look as if that's actually what's happening. But that instability also creates real instability for the government itself, because Americans at this point still remember, 105 days ago when we had a very stable country. Now, that's not to say that there weren't changes that needed to be made. We have had, as I say, this extraordinary upward transmission of money from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. We've seen the cutbacks in all sorts of ways to promote civil rights and things like that. But we did have this concept that we were going to have a government that was basically a modern state. And now the administration is trying to destroy that modern state, to take it down to the ground and replace it with, some people want a theocracy, some people want a tech bro paradise, and some people want a very heavy-handed anti-immigrant sort of pro-Hungarian Viktor Orban style government. And none of those things are popular with the majority of Americans. So that instability could in fact help an authoritarian rise, or it could do what it's done in the past in the United States, help the people reclaim control over their government.
Oh, that is a hopeful assessment. And I really hope that's what happens because, as someone who might be getting Social Security in the next few years, it would be nice to be able to call the office and have someone answer. I mean, just the basic services of government, to have them work, is something that I think all Americans of any party should expect. And right now, that's being called into question on purpose.
Well, yes. And one of the things that sort of floors me is that since the 1980s, we really don't talk about raising taxes on the very wealthy. Everything is about cuts, cuts, cuts. And one of the things I don't think we emphasize enough in the United States is that our tax rate compared to any other country with a developed economy is so far off what the actual tax rates are in those other countries. We are so far below them that this idea that the way we're going to balance the deficit, which of course has come as a result of the George W. Bush tax cuts and the Donald Trump tax cuts. Remember, Bill Clinton balanced the budget, but the fact that our answer is not, well, let's get rid of these extraordinary tax cuts that put us into this very, very, very low tax bracket, and instead is to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, seems to me just bonkers. Yeah. I mean, aside from anything personal, for me, it's the look at the way the system works. And it was actually the Republican Party that created the system of income taxes during the American Civil War to guarantee that those who were able to pay the taxes were the ones on whom Congress laid them. And, this idea now that what we're going to do in the 21st century is get rid of basic human services in what until 100 days ago was the wealthiest nation on earth it's just bizarre to me.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. And the only thing I agree about when they say make America great again, I always say great like in the Eisenhower years. Let's bring back those tax rates. And maybe then the government, because that created the middle class in large part. And we'd like to keep that middle class if possible, I hope.
Yes, and it's been thoroughly hollowed out. But the Eisenhower years are interesting because that's the 1950s, to which many MAGAs want to go back. And yet, as you say, it was not only the highest tax bracket there of 91 to 92% during the Eisenhower years. It was also the period in which we got things like investment in infrastructure, the highways, our interstate highway system, and also in education. And one of the things you're seeing now, of course, under the Trump administration are these attacks on education, especially on Harvard, in which they are and other universities, in which they are trying to argue that the federal government is doing a favor to an institution like Harvard or Columbia through grants that enable them to do scientific research, when it's actually the other way around, that by giving grants to very highly competitive peer-reviewed grants to institutes of higher education. What the government gets from that is they don't have to carry overhead. They don't have to carry scientists who might have one really good idea, but not many other good ideas. You don't have to hire somebody for life. You can sort of do a la carte. These are the kinds of investigations that we think are good for the American people, and without having to carry all this other weight. And that system, of course, came out of the Eisenhower years and created this extraordinarily innovative and very wealthy country because it was so effective. And now, of course, we seem to be tossing that out the window.
Yeah, that has been, I think, to me, the most interesting thing is that our strengths are what are being attacked. You know, the research scientists, the whole system that produces Nobel Prizes and all the innovations, and our politics. And we'll talk more about that in Santa Fe in a week or so. And I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure for me. This has been another Conversations Different, and we'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to Conversations Different, hosted by me, Inez Russell Gomez, editorial page editor for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our weekly episodes would not be possible without your support. We hope you enjoy them and keep listening. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Consider signing up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our podcast is available by visiting our website, santafenewmexican.com/podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez is produced by Matt Dalside and Ernesto Cisneros, published by the Santa Fe New Mexican, a local and independent newspaper owned by Robin Martin.